Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, staff writer Zach Everson. Zach, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me again, Brittany.
In the about a week and a half since Donald Trump won the election, he has been fast and furious at picking his cabinet. And the president-elect nominated now former Congressman Matt Gaetz to serve as his attorney general. Right after that announcement, Gaetz resigned from the House, and this came days before the House Ethics Committee was going to release a report on sexual misconduct and drug allegations against Matt Gaetz. Gaetz denies any wrongdoing here, so first, can you walk us through the timeline? What is this situation?
So the House Ethics Committee has been investigating Gaetz now for several years, and that's sadly the way these ethics investigations go on. They do not get resolved often in one Congress. So they've been investigating. They did the very unusual step earlier this year of just giving an update on it. They're required by law to, at some point, to acknowledge if there is an investigation going on a lot of the time. And they did that back several years ago. But in this case, there were reports out there that I believe it was the congressman or some of his surrogates were saying that nothing was coming of this. And the Ethics Committee made the unusual step of putting out a statement confirming that the investigation was in fact going on, is still happening. They outlined what some of the issues were that they were looking at that you just mentioned. And we hadn't heard anything. One thing, the investigation could have wrapped a while ago, but the committee is not allowed to release reports in the run-up to an election, which sounds, a little bit counterintuitive there. Like, hey, if something like this is coming out, we should know. But they just didn't want it to be used for partisan purposes.
Who sits on this committee? Is it bipartisan, nonpartisan? What's the makeup? What does this look like? Because you and I have talked about the House Ethics Committee before.
Yes, it is bipartisan. There are 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans. It is not exactly one of the juicy committee assignments. Nobody wants to be in charge of knocking on their peers. They don't typically do a lot in terms of punishments out there. Like, they get a fair amount of investigations, some of which they initiate on their own, many of which are referred to them by the Office of Congressional Ethics. That is a nonpartisan group of career staffers. And they'll have to acknowledge when they get a referral from the Office of Congressional Ethics, but then we don't necessarily find out what happened to it. It can just disappear. So if they are punishing people, it's happening behind the scenes. The public, the voters certainly aren't finding out about anything.
So as we know, based on the timeline, Gaetz reportedly resigns just days before this was expected to be released. Since he resigned, does that end the inquiry? What does that look like?
Yeah, so he resigned on Wednesday night, and shortly thereafter, Punchbowl News broke the story that the committee planned a vote on this on Friday about releasing part of it. So, very well timed. Not the first congressperson to resign rather than have to deal with this kind of thing. Only, he had a wonderful landing pad, which is actually several steps up by having been nominated to be the attorney general by Donald Trump. So it's really interesting there what the committee is going to do, if anything, with this report. Now, as soon as a member of Congress leaves, they are outside the committee's jurisdiction, has been the way the committee has interpreted that rule. So if you actually look at the rules, which I spent some time doing yesterday, it doesn't specifically say former members of Congress are excluded from the committee's jurisdiction. It lists who the committee does have jurisdiction over, and former members of Congress are not there. And that is how the committee has interpreted that. There are other places in writing where they've said, like, this person's out of Congress, we don't have jurisdiction anymore. But they still could release that report, it appears. I reached out to the committee's staff director a couple times, kept getting back just a 2-word no comment when asking if there were any paths for the documents to come out. But it does look like, based on precedent, that if Congress wants to share this information, there are ways to put it out there that don't involve leaking it.
And you actually looked back at history here. You looked back at precedent to see what has happened before to give us some insight into what could potentially happen in the Gaetz situation. You looked at a Democrat as well as a few Republicans. What did you find?
Yeah, Punchbowl News found an example of Representative Bill Bauer, a Democrat from Texas, back in 1987, that he had resigned to become mayor of Nashville, and the committee went ahead and put out the report on him. That predates the internet, a lot harder to find government documents that are that old. But we did find some examples of the Office of Congressional Ethics, again, that nonpartisan group putting out reports about members of Congress who had left. The first one in 2010, they put out one on Congressman Nathan Deal, who is a Republican from Georgia. They were looking into him on allegations that he used his official position to try to sway the state of Georgia to continue a program that benefited his salvage yard. Now, he resigned just after the office had referred the case to the committee. Committee never said anything on it. He resigned. He was running for governor, so that he did actually have another reason to resign other than just to bury this. But 9 days after he left Congress, the Office of Congressional Ethics released that document anyways. They cited that they have the power to release any communication pursuant to its rules as necessary to conduct official business. And similarly, they issued reports on 2 staff members of congressmen who had also been under investigation after those staff members had left their jobs.
When you're looking at the past, you mentioned this earlier, that people don't really want to be on the House Ethics Committee. No one's really too keen on snitching on their coworkers. But what's the committee's reasoning to release these after the person hasn't sought re-election or has resigned?
Well, the committee, so another example would be Blake Farenthold, a little bit more recent, who in 2018, the committee was in its 3rd year of investigating him. And shortly after he was informed that there would be a vote, he resigned. And they did not issue the report in that circumstance, but they did go ahead and put out a statement on it, just since the matters were so significant involving sexual harassment. They also did a similar step with Thomas Garrett, who was a congressman from Virginia, another Republican, and they were investigating him for crimes that were, allegations that were much less serious than what we've been talking about here with Gaetz, but that he had staffers doing personal tasks for him, like chauffeuring his daughters and walking his dog. Now, he decided not to seek re-election, but the committee, they busted their buns to get the report out while he was still there. So they weren't able to really punish him at all. But one day before he was going to leave Congress, they put out the report. And they said that they did it because they just thought it was so important and that staffers could use this guidance. So, my thought is, if it's so important that that members of Congress get guidance not to let staffers walk their dog, the allegations against Gaetz are certainly much more serious and should, probably have a public vetting. But again, different makeup of the committee then versus now.
And as we said, these allegations are very serious. They involve sexual misconduct, drug allegations, amongst others. Gaetz has denied them. Before you and I came on to talk today, Speaker Mike Johnson said he didn't want the Ethics Committee to release this report at all. We still don't have the report. We don't know if it's going to be released. Is there any indication either way of what the House Ethics Committee is going to do this time around?
No, they were supposed to meet to vote on it today. They canceled that meeting. There are 5 Republicans on there, and you need a majority vote. So you're going to need 1 Republican to vote to put it out there. And, Donald Trump has a very big mandate. And are you going to want to be the 1 Republican to vote to put out this report on his nominee to be Attorney General? Probably not. So I don't necessarily think it's going to come out through any sort of official way via a vote. There are probably a decent amount of staffers on that committee. You've got the 10 members as well. You've got their staffers. If it eventually became public, I wouldn't be too surprised. Apparently, there are reports that senators, including Republican senators, have been asking for copies of the report as well. So we're going to see if it comes out through some sort of back channel would be the most likely way we'd see it, I would imagine.
This report is definitely looming large over Gaetz's head as he is trying to get confirmed to be the Attorney General once Trump gets sworn in. What are you looking for next in this entire situation?
The report to leak would be the one thing. I've kind of been checking on that regularly, looking at, places online where documents like that tend to show up, looking at some of my colleagues who are, working at the House. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things I think I hate to say this, but it might get pushed aside by the next nomination that Trump makes. I mean, we kind of saw it. This was the big story, and then he put, anti-vax, anti-fluoride RFK Jr. To be his nominee for Health and Human Services. And, while Gaetz still was a big story, that Kennedy one sucked some of the oxygen out of it. So, it's going to be interesting next week when we're 4 or 5 new nominees down the road, and there's probably a whole bunch of other things dominating the media cycle, if this will die down. But obviously, it will come back to light when his hearing does start in the next Congress.
Well, Zach, certainly a lot to look out for. Per usual, thank you so much for your reporting.
Thanks for having me.